Hey everyone, tonight we start with feudal Japan, the land of geishas who get mistaken for other people every 5 minutes, and monks who did more than just meditate. So before you get too comfortable, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who from around the world is joining us. Now, turn down the lights and maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum in the background. And let's take it easy as we start our journey tonight. People usually think of a samurai as a 6 foot tall statue of discipline, standing perfectly still under a cherry blossom tree with dramatic flute music playing in the background. The man never blinks, sweats, or smiles. He just breathes honor. If you believe the stereotype, he only lives by poetry and principles. He is only afraid of losing his honor and maybe a lukewarm bowl of tea. Sadly, history is here to mess up your style. Samurai weren't Zen superheroes. They were armed men with bad tempers, allergies, debts, grudges, and a love-hate relationship with rice taxes. The famous Bushido Code, which is the holy book of honor, was mostly written after the wars were over. At that point, samurai had nothing to do but sit around the house, write moral rules, and act like they had always acted that way. Think about someone writing rules for the gym after everyone had already left. That's what Bushido is. The real medieval samurai was a professional warrior, which meant that they didn't die right away. Some were very loyal, others turned on their lords faster than you can say, better offer. A lot of people switched sides in the middle of the war, like free agents in a very violent sports draft. One clan even switched sides in the middle of a fight, just because they wanted to. Not today, thanks. And let's not act like all samurai were calm and collected. These guys wrote dramatic poems about they were moody, got angry when people didn't pay attention to them, and even killed people because they insulted their horse. If you think modern men are hard to read, try a samurai who just lost at poetry night. Samurai protected the weak, as shown in movies. In real life, peasants prayed that samurai wouldn't come through their village. When a samurai came to visit, it meant taxes, chickens being taken away, or a new rule like don't breathe too loudly near the estate. A samurai protected a village from bandits because he was already using that village for taxes and didn't want to have to compete with it. They weren't monks who lived simply and followed strict rules. They were government workers who were stressed out because they had to write reports, go to ceremonies, survive wars, remember how to act, manage land, and still look scary while they were sweating and making bad decisions. The truth is very simple. Samurai were people who used swords. Is it dangerous? Yes. Is it honorable? Overhyped at times? Always. If the stereotype makes them look perfect, the truth is that they are deeply flawed men trying to hold a country that is falling apart together while hoping no one notices their armor. It smells like regret. If movies were true, ninjas would be supernatural shadow beings that could turn invisible, run across rooftops without making a sound, and kill a room full of guards with just a decorative chopstick and pure rage. A ninja is like a cheap Batman with more smoke bombs and less therapy for their feelings. Unfortunately, reality is back, knocking, coming in, and ruining the fantasy. If we're being historically accurate, a real ninja or shinobi wasn't a magical killer who used mystical arts. He didn't move through space. He didn't flip through the air like a gymnast on caffeine. And he definitely didn't wear all black pajamas that made him look like a spy. Theater actors came up with that costume so that people in the audience could easily tell who was supposed to be invisible. Yes, ninjas really do dress like stagehands. Real ninjas. They dress like farmers, merchants, monks, and delivery men. In short, anything that wouldn't get the attention of the local samurai who had a bad habit of stabbing first and never asking questions. Ninjas were spies first, then saboteurs, and sometimes they even set fires to change the look of the inside of a building. Backflips and blade tricks were not the most important skills they had. It was good at lying, blending in, and running away faster than any man in sandals should be able to do it. The ninja toolkit was surprisingly useful. Check the rope, check for disguises, toxic. Sometimes, yes, smoke bombs. Not for dramatic disappearing, but for, oh no, everything's awful. It's time to run as fast as you can into the woods. The idea of a quiet rooftop assassin also falls apart when you remember that Japanese rooftops were made of wood and tiles that were meant to give away your location if a squirrel coughed nearby. If a ninja ever tried to run across if it happened on a roof like in the movies, everyone within 12 miles would know about it. The idea that samurai and ninjas were enemies for life is also silly. Samurai hired most ninjas. Ninja clans like Eager and Koga made money by doing the dirty work that samurai didn't want to admit they needed. Spying, sabotage, and quietly getting rid of people who were causing problems but couldn't be publicly removed. A ninja was not a demon in the shadows. He worked as an intelligence officer on the blue-collar side, balancing spying, improvisation, and fitness for the heart and blood vessels. He was smart, sneaky, and knew when to say, "Nope, I'm not dying for this mission." Yes, ninjas were dangerous, but not because they could do magical backflips. They were dangerous because they were sneaky, smart, and knew how to get away before the sword swung. People often think of the shogun as the last boss of Japan, a godlike mastermind sitting in a golden hall. Samurai are the warrior heroes, and ninjas are the mysterious shadows. Stroking his perfect beard while he runs the whole country with perfect calm. The stereotype says he's a godlike strategist who never breaks a sweat and never has to worry about taxes, paperwork, or that one daimyo who keeps acting suspiciously loyal. Stress is what reality wants to say. The shogun was like the CEO of chaos, in charge of hundreds of heavily armed landlords who were as emotionally stable as caffeinated squirrels. He wasn't a calm ruler, giving out wisdom from a mountaintop. He was a military dictator who was always tired and was doing everything he could to keep the country from blowing up again. Medieval Japan was like a pressure cooker full of swords ambition, rice, and anger. People think that the emperor was in charge of Japan. No, the emperor was more like a spiritual figurehead, loved, respected, and important in a ceremonial way, but not very powerful in politics. The shogun was in charge of everything, which meant all the problems. Famine, monks who wanted to fight, samurai who were angry, merchants who wanted to make money, lost paperwork, and foreign ships on the horizon landed right on his already busy desk. The shogun had to balance diplomacy with, "Please don't revolt today," every day. Every daimyo said they were loyal, but half of them were secretly plotting, and the other half were too busy messing up their rice to start a rebellion, even if they wanted to. The shogun had to keep them in line by making them spend a lot of money on trips to Edo, ceremonies, and taking care of two households. Households were less about honor and more about, "Let me bankrupt you so you behave." Any time of peace under the shogunate wasn't really peace. The shogun kept the country together with bribes, threats of military action, and the constant fear that someone, somewhere, was sharpening a sword. Oh, just in case. Did shoguns have any power? Of course. Did they like it? No way. You try to run a country where half of your workers have katanas, the other half have grudges, and everyone thinks. Meditation is a valid alternative to therapy. The shogun was not a godlike ruler in the end. He was in charge of the world's most dangerous group project, and then everyone else had a sword. If stereotypes were true, a geisha would be a soft-spoken seductress walking through streets lit by lanterns, whispering poetry into a samurai's ear and playing the shamisen under the moonlight. She only exists in movies to look classy, act mysterious, and break hearts for a living, like a person. A perfume ad with better hair. Reality would like to make a polite but angry correction. A geisha is not a prostitute, a quarter son, a companion for hire, a Japanese escort, a samurai girlfriend, or even the Ida Toera version of that girl at the club who makes good eye contact. Geisha were, and still are, professional entertainers who are very good at dancing, singing, acting, talking, and managing their emotions in front of a lot of people. The samurai were basically experts at negotiating during a crisis. If samurai were the sword of Japan, geisha were the music that made the room feel expensive enough for everyone to act like they weren't about to fall apart politically. Training started early and was very hard. AMO wasn't learning how to flirt because she was training to be a geisha. She was learning how to keep a rich daimyo's attention without giving him any hopes that he shouldn't have. It was a skill of balance, charm without being asked, grace without giving in, being there without owning. I'm here to make you laugh, not to adopt you. At the same time, the stereotype confusion mostly comes from Western tourists in the 1800s who, in true Western style, got everything wrong. They saw women in fancy kimonos and thought, "Ah, yes, this is clearly the sexy job." These were the same people who thought chopsticks were small weapons, so they weren't very good at being right. In real life, geisha were respected cultural figures. They weren't going into tea houses to serve anyone but the mood. They entertained with acting, talking, and being funny, which scared many samurai more than a duel with weapons. Could a geisha really fall in love? Yes, she was a person, even though she looked like she wasn't. But that was a personal matter, not a work matter. If a geisha took on a romantic patron, it was a slow, formal process that involved more legal paperwork than romance. The stereotype of the seductive geisha exists because of history, was filtered through tourists who needed subtitles and had very active imaginations. The truth, geisha were and still are artists who are disciplined, skilled, and in control. They are the living embodiment of grace under pressure. And none of that needed them to take off their clothes. The Oon is the reason why the geisha is the most misunderstood woman in Japan. When people call a geisha a prostitute, an Oyan in the afterlife sighs and says, "That was my job. Respect the resume." Geisha were entertainers, but Uran were elite courtesans, with the emphasis on elite. These weren't the kinds of people you see in dark alleys. We were closer to famous people who also worked in the pleasure business. They were the high-end version of intimacy during the Edo period, the "if you have to ask, you can't afford it" version. Let's start with the clothes, since that's where the stereotype usually starts. A fashion designer dressed Oon dared them to wear everything at once. High platform sandals, check. Check. Hair full of ornaments from a whole cherry tree. The kimono was so heavy and layered that it took the balance and muscle control of an Olympic figure skater to walk in it. Definitely check. And Oon didn't just walk. She did a slow-motion strut called the Urin Dochu, which looked like a fashion show mixed with a hostage situation. Men were amazed as she walked by. Part of it was because she was beautiful, and part of it was because they didn't know how she was still standing up under 60 yards of silk. But this is where people make mistakes. It wasn't just about being physically beautiful to be an Oon. They learned how to write poetry, calligraphy, behave properly, have witty conversations, play instruments, and flatter rich men without getting too close to any of them. They were basically influencers before influencers, but they had real talent. Customers didn't pay them for their time. They fought for it. And Oon didn't say yes to everyone. Like a queen choosing her subjects, she carefully chose her customers. Advisors, but with more incense and a little more on the line emotionally. And then there's the big mess, geisha. History gets messy when the two meet in the entertainment districts. But the roles were not the same in terms of society, culture, money, spirituality, or function. The Uran's world was all about closeness and status. Art and performance were at the center of the geisha's life. One sold charm, and the other sold mood. People still get them mixed up, which shows that. Confusion lasts a long time. We are beautiful, strong, and stuck at the same time. People who could afford them loved them, but people who couldn't hated them. They were beautiful and sad, wrapped in silk and hope. But at least their hair looked great while they did it. The Ronin is the ultimate lone wolf in movies. He is a mysterious swordsman who wanders dusty roads looking for revenge, justice, and maybe a beautiful sunset. He doesn't talk much, but he fights perfectly and keeps a level. of calm that makes it seem like he takes cold showers every morning while thinking about his future. Try being an unemployed samurai with bills, trauma, no benefits, and no HR department. A Ronin was just a samurai who didn't have a lord anymore. The samurai left because the lord died, was overthrown, fired him, or, in some cases, because he quit. He ran away and hoped no one would see him. The word literally means wave man, which is someone who drifts through society without a purpose, like a leaf on water. Friend who changes jobs every 6 months. The idea that Ronin were noble, stoic warriors is mostly a romantic story written hundreds of years later by people who didn't have to deal with being unemployed. Real Ronin had the same problems as modern-day unemployed men. They didn't know who they were poor, and they had to take on questionable side jobs. A lot of Ronin became wandering teachers, hoping that someone would want to learn how to fight with a sword, act properly, or get through an ego collapse. Others tried to work on a farm, but failed spectacularly and went back on the road feeling even worse. Some of them became mercenaries, some became bodyguards, and some became thieves. A starving man with a sword and no money tends to lose his moral compass. The well-known story of the 47 Ronin didn't help. People act like it's the best way to show honor, but most Ronin weren't planning noble vendettas. They were trying to figure out how to get money for their next bowl of noodles. The 47 became famous because they got revenge, became legends, and then killed themselves, making it impossible for the rest of Ronin to succeed. Life on the road wasn't like a movie. It was dangerous, dirty, and lonely. Ronin couldn't just knock on a daimo's door and ask for work, especially since daimo were already having problems with samurai who weren't very loyal. Many cities even kept Ronin out because men with a lot of weapons and unstable emotions were a threat to public safety. And even though people thought Ronin was cool, he didn't spend all day fighting. Most duels ended with someone getting hurt, dying, or both. So, most Ronins didn't want to risk their lives in a sword fight unless they had to or were already at rock bottom, in which case death by dramatic duel was probably on their bucket list. The truth, Ronin were not magical fighters. They were samurai without jobs, trying to make it in feudal Japan's gig economy with a sword, a bad attitude, and the last bit of dignity they had. If you believe movies, Ashigaru were the nameless, soldiers without faces, whose only job is to run forward, scream loudly, and die right away so the samurai hero can look cool standing alone. They look like cheap cardboard cutouts in armor that doesn't fit right. In short, the medieval Japanese version of an NPC with one line. As usual, reality is much less flattering and much more heroic. The Ashigaru were foot soldiers who were born poor and didn't get paid much. They were expected to fight with whatever weapon their lord had lying around that month. Sometimes they used spears, and other times they used bows. Sometimes, when morale was low, a very sharp gardening tool. These men did not grow up with poetry and honor. These men grew up with rice shortages, back pain, and the heavy burden of knowing that their armor was worth more than their lives. The stereotype makes them look dumb, but Ashigaru were the most important facet of Japanese warfare. No samurai army would last longer than it takes to say Konnichiwa wrong without them. They were the foot soldiers, the archers, and the first people to attack, the last people to defend, the workers, and the people who cleaned up after the samurai finished posing dramatically. In a word, everything. And now let's talk about throwaway. You can throw away Ashigaru just like you can throw away your spine. You could live without it, but you wouldn't win any battles. Their training was very different. Some lords drilled their Asharu over and over again, making them into disciplined foot soldiers. Other lords just gave peasants spears and told them to stand there and try not to die too fast. Either way, Ashigaru knew that any battle could end in glory, death, or both. People think that a Shigaru is weak or not very good at fighting because they weren't wearing lacquered armor or waving polished katanas. But these men marched for miles every day, carried heavy gear, slept in mud, and fought brutal close-range battles with the strength of people who had never heard of days off. And the samurai. They depended on a Shigaru more than they would ever say. Samurai armies needed a Shigaru to hold the line, take the arrows, swarm the enemy, and win while the best warriors worried about their honor, family, and whether their helmet crest was big enough. Ashigaru weren't fancy. They weren't fancy. No one wrote an epic poem about them. They were overworked, underpaid, and always one order away from getting into trouble, so that someone with a prettier helmet could get the credit for the win. It's easy to see the truth. Samurai were good at fighting. Ashigaru made it possible for them to win. In modern depictions, the daimyo is a scary figure, a dark warlord brooding in a candlelit castle, petting a hawk, laughing with evil grace, and coming up with plans that would make a drama series. He usually has trembling servants, untrustworthy advisors, and a koi pond that is placed just right to show how deep he is emotionally. Reality was a lot less like a movie and a lot more like managing property. A Dao was like a landlord with guns who ran a domain full of, every spring, he had to deal with peasants, samurai taxes, drama over irrigation, failed harvests, and at least one cousin who wasn't very good at what he did, trying to take over. He wasn't planning to take over the world. He was trying to keep the extra rice above the level at which everyone would riot. That was the real battlefield. Daimyo did lead armies, but they also led budgets, construction projects, and a list of angry samurai who wanted raises. A daimyo's day began and ended with reports, and sometimes there was a rebellion, a fire, or attempted murder, a bridge that fell down, or a famine in the middle. The artist couldn't paint existential crisis into a face, so daimyo looks stoic in art. Our stereotype makes daimyo look like smart strategists. A lot of them were. Some people made choices that were nothing short of creative disasters. Some people spent a lot of money making their castles look nice, but they didn't get ready for war. Some people wasted money on huge helmet decorations that weren't needed. At least one daimyo thought it was A. It was a good idea to fight the shogun with nothing but excitement and bad poetry. It wasn't, though. There was also the Sanken Kotai system, which was like the shogun's yearly Make the Daimyo Broke tour. Daimyo had to keep two homes, one in their own territory and one in Edeto. To show loyalty, they had to travel across the country with a huge group of people. It was part political theater, part terrible financial punishment, and part exercise. Imagine having to walk 100 miles with thousands of retainers just so. The shogun could say, "Good job, don't rebel this year." Daimyo also had to deal with clan politics, arranged marriages, succession crises, border disputes, temple complaints, and merchants who were secretly richer than they were. A daimyo could become a ronin with nicer clothes at any time if they had 5 bad harvests in a row. In short, no, daimyo were not anime villains sitting on thrones of absolute power. They were tired leaders trying to keep their clan, their land, and their sanity from going down at the same time, falling apart at the same time. Daimyo fought the government, while samurai fought wars. And to be honest, the bureaucracy was worse. Most people think of a Japanese monk as a brave, calm person meditating under a waterfall, whispering deep truths to travelers who pass by, and gently urging them to find peace within themselves. They float through people's minds like walking fortune cookies that talk in haiku and never raise their voices above a soft breeze. History, on the other hand, is laughing so hard that it is rolling on the floor. Let's be clear, some monks really did meditate. Some really wanted to learn more. Some people lived quiet, disciplined lives of prayer and study. But a lot of monks, especially in Japan during the Middle Ages, were more like lightly armed landlords with a spiritual brand. These were the Sohi, or warrior monks. Monks who had weapons, armor, private armies, and no chill at all, which is something that no modern HR department would allow. If you think that monk means peaceful, try to picture 1,000 of them marching down a mountain with naginata, chanting sutras, and getting ready to settle a religious disagreement with fire and sharp metal. When you learn that whole temples were like feudal power centers, the idea of peaceful monks goes away. Temples owned land, collected taxes, stored wealth, and fought for power like monasteries on caffeine. The line between spiritual guidance and military occupation was often as thin as a piece of parchment. They didn't send diplomats when a temple wanted to get ahead in politics. They sent monks, protesting by marching into the capital with holy symbols. Symbols that, for reasons that aren't clear but are very clear, often led to riots. The court didn't respect these actions because they were religious, but because the monks were armed, organized, and very comfortable with damaging property. And yes, rival temples fought each other, not just in words, but also with fire, siege warfare, and a zeal that made it seem like arson could lead to enlightenment. Even the more peaceful, sects weren't always at peace. A monk might spend the morning copying sutras and the afternoon beating up a thief who got too close. Another person might talk about compassion but then charge people on the battlefield for blessings. Temples had to pay their workers, and spirituality cost money. But even with all the chaos, monks were very important cultural figures. They kept knowledge alive, shaped Japanese philosophy, influenced politics, and taught the elite. They were scholars, diplomats, healers, and sometimes, sadly, pyromaniacs. So, no, not all monks were wise men who floated above the worries of the world. They were complicated, strong, dramatic, and sometimes scary people who took part in Japan's feudal mess. Some monks wanted to become enlightened, some wanted peace, some wanted to fight, and some wanted to do all three. The stereotype of Japanese farmers is almost too kind. A humble peasant greets the sunrise with thanks, plants rice in peaceful silence, and smiles warmly at the ground like a man who definitely sleeps 8 hours a day. Never once been threatened by a samurai who was worried about taxes. In movies, farmers are there to set the mood, teach moral lessons, and sometimes give a sad speech about how simple life can be. Reality would like to file a complaint that tastes like rice. Being a farmer in feudal Japan was so hard that people today would sue just for reading about it. These were not Zen gardeners who were at peace. These were endurance athletes stuck in a never-ending horror show about farming. Farmers worked from dawn to dawn the next day, worked planting, harvesting, fixing tools, fixing themselves, and praying that the weather wouldn't ruin everything again. And let's talk about taxes, which samurai did. Farmers had to pay taxes in rice. Not money, not favors, just rice. This meant that their way of life was taken away as soon as it appeared. Samurai would come into the village and demand their share, which usually meant all the rice we want and whatever else you were hoping to eat this winter. If farmers looked calm in art, it's because the artist didn't have enough ink to show how upset they were. The stereotype says that people respected farmers because they were the backbone of society. In real life, they were respected like a horse, important, hard-working, and always overworked. Every year, farmers put everything they had on the line for things they couldn't control. Floods, droughts, bugs, typhoons, rice blight, bandits, taxes, fire, war, more war, and sometimes samurai acting like a wrecking ball. One bad harvest could mean starvation. A single change in politics led to higher taxes. A single samurai patrol meant hiding any food so it wouldn't mysteriously disappear. But somehow, farmers kept the whole thing going. They built irrigation systems, rotated crops, took care of villages, raised families, held festivals they couldn't afford, and still made it to battle when their lord needed militia support. They did everything but sleep. In fact, if a Japanese farmer from the Middle Ages had ever seen he probably would have thought he was dead if he had ever had a moment of true peace. So farmers weren't peaceful villagers living in harmony with their spiritual lives. They were tired, strong, and unrecognized heroes of feudal Japan. They carried the whole country on their backs while everyone else fought over honor. The only easy thing about their life was that it was just too hard. If you believe the stereotype, Japan's feudal merchants were shady people who made deals in alleys and whispered, "What's it?" like used car salesmen from the Middle Ages, worth to you. They are shown in movies as greedy, smart, and socially lower than others. The kind of people samurai would only touch if they had to pay taxes or if they needed to blame someone for inflation. But reality loves irony, and merchants were the most ironic people. In Japan, merchants were officially at the bottom of the social ladder, below samurai, farmers, and artisans. Farmers grow food, artisans make tools, samurai make laws, and merchants just move things around, like delivery men with a lot of praise. So, merchants weren't getting much done. While samurai were writing poems about honor and farmers were dying from working too hard, merchants were quietly coming up with capitalism. Merchants had money by the time of the Edo period, a lot of money. They ran trade networks, controlled credit, paid for construction projects, set fashion trends, owned entertainment districts, paid for plays, bribed officials, and indirectly shaped the tastes of the country. In essence, they were bankers from the Middle Ages with better kimonos. Samurai who were jealous mostly made up the stereotype of the greedy merchant. Samurai got fixed amounts of rice as pay, which didn't keep up with the cost of living. Merchants, on the other hand, made a lot of money and paid a lot of interest. Samurai were honorable, merchants had cash. Take a guess at which one paid rent. Merchants had to act like they were poor because showing off their wealth could get them in trouble. So they learned how to flex quietly. No big estates, just simple homes with fancy interiors, not seen by the public. No flashy jewelry, but whole warehouses full of silk, sake, and art for business. You can't get political power unless you lend money to politicians. And even though samurai liked to look down on merchants, they also liked to borrow money from them a lot, sometimes in a rude way. Some low-class merchants gave credit to samurai families out of pity or to take advantage of the situation. Merchants also had an impact on culture. They made kabuki popular and came up with new styles, and paid for whole entertainment districts like the Yoshiara. This is because if you control nightlife, you pretty much control society. So yes, merchants were smart. Yes, they were rich, but only greedy in the way that they liked eating food and not starving. The truth is straightforward. Samurai had a power on paper. Merchants had real power, and everyone knew it, especially the merchants. The idea of the Japanese swordmaster is almost like a religious event. He shows up in every movie as a mysterious, an old man with perfect posture, a voice that is barely audible, and eyebrows that show 600 years of sadness. He cuts falling leaves in half, beats 12 attackers without blinking, and only speaks in haiku that sound like lines from fortune cookies that were thrown away. But reality paints a slightly different picture. A tired, underpaid teacher trying to teach sword fighting to teens who would rather be doing anything else. Let's start with the most obvious myth, the notion that sword masters could cleave stone, pillars, iron armor, or, on days when the viewer really wants to believe, the viewer's suspension of disbelief. Real sword masters didn't do things that were impossible. If a student asked them how to cut through steel, the master would probably say, "With another piece of steel, idiot," and then send them back to sweep the floor. Sword masters ran dojus, which were less like mystical places of worship and more like martial arts schools where students swung wooden swords like they were real swords, trying to kill flies. Most of a master's day was spent correcting bad footwork, stopping students from hurting each other, and explaining for the 10th time why yelling louder doesn't make the sword sharper. People think that sword masters spend their days training heroes. In real life, they trained all day, no matter who paid the fee. Farmers, low-ranking samurai, merchants, kids, bored teens, and teens who want to cause trouble. Anyone with a few coins could join. It turns out that sword mastery is less, more about tuition than fate. Did some sword masters become famous? Yes, for sure. Men like Miyamoto Musashi became famous by winning jewels and writing philosophical works. But even Musashi didn't go around cutting rocks. He spent half his life teaching, wandering, avoiding responsibilities, and sometimes hitting students with wooden swords to make them stronger. Sword masters were also involved in politics. Schools that were rivals would challenge each other, hurt each other's chances, and sometimes even fight in the streets because someone said their footwork was better. Think about martial artists fighting online, but with real swords and a better chance of someone losing a limb. And the knowledge, yes, sword masters had it, but not all of it was magic words. Stop fighting like an angry chicken was sometimes all the advice they got. In the end, sword masters were not magical warriors living on top of mountains. They were skilled professionals who dealt with egos, injuries, money, dojo drama, and students who were. The quickness of turtles that are sleepy. The story is beautiful. The truth is that it is educational and doesn't involve cutting through a boulder. The idea of a female samurai or honor buga is pure movie magic. A deadly warrior woman who cuts through armies while wearing perfect eyeliner. Her hair was flowing behind her like a shampoo commercial that was also about sword violence. Modern depictions make her look like a one-woman army, casually humiliating whole clans while giving feminist speeches in perfect slow motion. Reality nods politely and then lets out a long sigh. Women warriors did exist in Japan. Yes, no. They weren't running around like anime heroes who can't be stopped and beat up 50 men before breakfast. And no, they did not fight in fancy armor that was meant to show off their cheekbones. Most honorabia were upper-class women who were taught how to protect their homes when their husbands, fathers, and other male relatives decided to leave home for battle and take the whole village defense force with them. Woman. Warriors often fought because they would die, let their home burn down, or do both in that order. Movies often show the naginata, a long pole arm that is usually associated with women. The stereotype. It was given to women because it is beautiful and graceful. The truth. It let women stab intruders from a safe and respectable distance. If someone breaks into your house and you greet him with a 6-foot blade, that says equality. Did legendary female warriors exist? Of course, Tomo, Gozen, the Beyonce of medieval Japan, fought in the Jinni War. People said she was strong, beautiful, and scary, which are the three best things you can say about someone. During the Boshin War, Nanoteo led women into battle and showed that "don't mess with me" is a timeless idea. But these women were not the norm, they were the exception. Hollywood would have you believe that Japan had whole armies of female samurai running into battle like a flash mob of ancient feminists. Most women who fought did so because, in times of need, sieges, uprisings, last stands, and "oh no, the samurai are coming through the gate" moments at home. When the Edo period came to an end, women's martial arts training went from being a necessity for survival to a cultural tradition. The naginata became the right weapon for moral virtue, physical discipline, and proving to your neighbors that you could end a fight for good. No, female samurai were not made-up warriors who wore flowing silk robes. They were women who were trained, tough, and resourceful, defended their homes, families, and dignity because someone had to, and the guys were all yelling about honor a few miles away. In short, these are not mythological creatures, mascots, or mascara model warriors. They are real women who do real violence when they have to. The Yakuza is a popular idea in modern pop culture. Sharp suits, full body tattoos, samurai level self-control, and a moral code that is stricter than most people's gym routines. They are shown as noble, criminals, good outlaws, and the misunderstood bad boys of Japan's underworld. The truth about the Edo period. Try petty criminals who are addicted to gambling and don't keep their hygiene up. Japan used to have two main criminal groups before the modern Yakuza: tea sellers and bakudo gamblers. The Yakuza prototype is what you get when you mix them together, squint a little, and romanticize them for 300 years. But in their original form, these men were as glamorous as someone yelling at a stray dog behind a sake shop. Let's begin with the tea, which are the traveling merchants. Sounds good, right? No. Tea sold cheap things at fairs, markets, and along the road. Half the time it's legal. The other half, don't ask questions. They set up territories, collected protection money, sometimes hired muscle, and definitely didn't read old codes of honor before charging farmers too much for wooden toys. After that, there were the bakuto, who were gamblers. These guys lived in huts by the side of the road, ran makeshift casinos, and preyed on travelers who were bored or drunk. They used cards, dice, and smart math to make sure that luck always seemed to favor the house. If someone won too much, the bakudo would suddenly need to talk to him alone outside, where the chances of survival dropped a lot. These criminals were not suave anti-heroes. Many of them were desperate men at the bottom of society who moved between poverty, violence, and any shady job that kept the sake flowing. Their tattoos, which are now famous, used to be a sign that they were criminals, not fashion icons. In those days, getting a tattoo on your whole body was less. Artistic expression and more. Please do not hire me. I'm committed to bad decisions. They also weren't respected, Samurai despised them, merchants tolerated them, villagers feared them. Even other Bakuto didn't trust Bakuto, which is impressive considering they shared the same profession. The stereotypical honorable gangster didn't exist yet. There was no oath of loyalty, no rigid hierarchy, no dramatic sword duels in the rain. Early underworld types mostly fought with knives, fists, and whatever object they could grab before security arrived. But here's the funny part. Despite being chaotic, dangerous, and frequently broke, these early gangs laid the foundation for the modern Yakuza structure. The hierarchy, the rituals, the territory system. Over time, their reputation grew, their myth expanded, their style evolved. But in the Edo period, they were just criminals with better branding than bandits. No neon lights, no code of honor, no loyalty, just dice, debt, and desperation. If there's one stereotype more persistent, the idea that all of feudal Japan was peaceful, elegant, and minimalist perfection is more common than samurai honor or ninja magic. It was a place where everyone practiced Zen. Gardens raped themselves, tea ceremonies cured stress, and no one ever raised their voice except to compliment cherry blossoms. According to modern imagination, medieval Japan was basically a 600-year wellness retreat. Reality bursts through the sliding paper doors like a sweaty tax collector. Let's start with the aesthetic myth. Yes, Japan produced breathtaking art, refined tea ceremonies, delicate poetry, and architecture that still inspires designers today. But that's the highlight reel, not the daily reality. For every Zen garden, there were 50 muddy villages, 3 burning storehouses, and 1 castle undergoing repairs for the 5th decade in a row. Because the daimyo kept spending the budget on helmet decorations instead of construction materials, people imagined clean streets, polite citizens, and perfect order. Actual medieval Japanese cities were crowded, flammable, loud. Fires happened so often that some neighborhoods basically treated them as seasonal events, like cherry blossoms, but more destructive. Then there's the idea of national harmony. Supposedly, everyone respected strict social roles, honored tradition, and obeyed authority. In reality, feudal Japan looked like someone tried to organize society using origami and duct tape. Samurai fought samurai. Monks fought monks. Daimyo rebelled against the shogun. Peasants